Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
And good Tuesday evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service with you on this 7th of June. As always, we encourage you to check out your local weather information online at weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. Now, something that you might have already seen, kind of throwing out some sneak peeks at this, but you can check it out anytime, is the way our websites are going to work as we go into early and mid-July. Things are going to change. And if you like to use the website, if you like the tools there, if you've got your things bookmarked and set up on your phone and on your computer and your Mac, whatever you use, it's going to change. So go ahead and do yourself a favor soon, maybe tonight if you can, and take a look at how things work now. We've got some videos up on our YouTube page, NWS Anchorage there on YouTube. Just search that in the search bar. And you'll see some how-to videos about how to find marine weather forecasts, how to use your low bandwidth option if you're in the bush and got a poor signal, or perhaps you're just driving up and down the road and kind of have a bad or low spot, or you're out toward the coast, but you can still hit the cell tower. Yeah, check that out and use the low bandwidth option. There's ways to move around the new web page that are going to be different than what you're used to. We're trying to make it better. We're trying to make it work better for all parts of Alaska, but you got to take a look at it and then let us know if you can break it so we can get that fixed before July 6th. That's the magic date, so about a month from now. The weather info line, of course, is going to still be there. 800-472-0391 is the number there. On Facebook, NWS Alaska, on Twitter, NWS Alaska, as well as any of our 3 forecast offices. Hashtag AKwx for Alaska Weather, and find us on YouTube as well. You'll find this complete show at AKwx TV, the whole 30-minute show there, brought to you by our broadcast partners here at Alaska Public. Fire danger continues to be an issue, but you'll notice we have scrubbed clean South Central after more than an inch of rain in Anchorage yesterday, and many other communities saw a heaping handful as well. Up and down Cook Inlet, it was a soggy day and a record-breaking day for the Anchorage airport. Never have we had that much rainfall in one day, or at least for that day in June. For the entire month, though, about 1.62 inches, I believe, is the record rainfall for Anchorage. So we didn't break that. But surely was a soggy day and probably the 3rd wettest day in June history for Anchorage. So if you thought it was wet, you're right. You get your star for the day. Here's a look at the lower to middle Yukon Valley, and you'll notice some high areas of fire danger, as well as parts of the interior and Seward Peninsula out west and along the Koyukuk Valley there, just on the south slopes of the Brooks Range. Continued dry conditions, as well as the upper Tanana Valley. Southeast is in the clear for right now, so is southwestern Alaska. We still have some fires going out across southwestern Alaska, of course, and more wet weather there would probably be a good thing. Here's a look at the visible satellite picture, and will we find that wet weather? No, we will not. You'll notice that most of the activity as far as convective weather, as far as rising air clouds, or rising clouds build into towering showers and thunderstorms, are way over here, not over southwestern Alaska. One thing you do see is more clouds working across the Brooks Range, and we'll check on that situation here in a minute. We don't see it so well in this particular scan. For southeast, some drier weather there, south of Sitka to Ketchikan. A little bit of a weather disturbance out across the Central Gulf, and you can see a larger system south of Adak and Atka. As you watch that in the visible satellite picture one more time, you'll notice the frontal boundary that's moving right about here. This is going to continue working northward, and earlier today, St. Paul and St. George starting seeing more of those clouds working in from that south and western weather system. Here's an infrared picture now, and keep your eye on the north slope because the movement here is coming in from the north and from the west, and this is a direction that's going to bring in colder air, of course, and that's exactly what we're going to be watching for the central and eastern parts of the Beaufort Seacoast. Cold enough weather, in fact, that it's going to snow. It looks like many areas there in the eastern Beaufort Seacoast, as well as into the coastal plain up to the Brooks Range. We'll probably be talking about up to an inch of new snow there as that weather front works its way southward. Out across the west, drier conditions there across the lower and middle Yukon Valley. You can see that in the satellite picture there. Nice, dry, and clear air. And our weather maker here in the Gulf is really just a fish storm, not bothering too many folks there. It's not terribly strong, but it does have a little bit of moisture that's going to eventually slosh up into the central and southern parts of the panhandle as we go into the week. Here's a surface map, and colder air is in the making there as it drops southward across the Chukchi Sea coast. We've seen some showers across the Brooks Range today, a couple thunderstorms across the central Yukon. High pressures in charge of south central, southeast, seeing a little bit more of that north and westerly flow. Low pressures across the Gulf, and here's our weather system out across the central and western chain. A few showers along that. As we go into tonight, snow is possible across the north slope, and as that tracks southward and eastward slowly, it's going to bring more clouds to the interior, probably more so than any precipitation until we get into Thursday. And later in the week, we'll have a much better chance of rain and thunder for more places across the central and the eastern interior. For tonight, things should be relatively quiet. Some mountain showers across the Chugach and the Alaska Range. For southeast, a few areas of showery, wet weather, and out across the west. Frontal boundary working across the southern Bering Sea will bring a little bit more of a widespread area of light rain, generally south and west of the Pribilofs. Tomorrow, that works over the Pribilofs, and the winds may come up briefly as that happens. High pressure still in charge of Bristol Bay and the western Gulf at 1,021 millibars. You'll start out with morning fog, and in some cases, that might stick around for a while south of Nunivak Island and into parts of Bristol Bay. The colder air dropping southward into the central and eastern interior may kick up some showers and thunderstorms in the afternoon. The interaction of that colder air is just what good thunderstorms need to get going, and that could happen after the mild weather we've had for the last couple of days there, so watch for that. For southeast, a better chance for clouds for more places. Showers likely across the mountains as you get from Hyder to Ketchikan and Annette and northward, but most areas are not going to see that widespread wet weather. For Thursday, a situation that remains about the same there for most of the central and southern parts of southeast. The front across the northern Pacific today is marching toward southwestern Alaska and Bristol Bay. Winds will change direction a little bit there, but you'll see more clouds and showers than anything else. And our risk of shower and thunderstorm activity along the Alaska Range and eastward probably picks up a little bit more. That frontal boundary, that leading edge of cooler air, has kind of mixed out and fallen apart, so we don't have that very strong kind of snow shovel effect on moving that warmer air upward into those towering clouds, but the residual or leftover activity from that could certainly form again, especially near the mountains and in the vicinity of low pressure closer to the Alcan border. We have another surge of cooler air working across the north slope with another wave of low pressure there working from west to east, and that'll change the wind direction around again to more of a northwesterly flow, and rain and snow showers will continue to linger near the coast, especially east of Point Barrow toward Demarcation Point. Here's a look at the temperatures across the region today. For southeast, 50s and 60s, the capital city in the lower 60s this afternoon. Sitka 57 for our friends at the Coast Guard there and everybody else. Lower to mid 60s for southern parts of southeast. A fairly mild day in all regions. Across Prince William Sound, 54 in Valdez. It was 60 in Kenai, lower 60s around the Anchorage Bowl. Northward up toward Talkeetna and Squetna, we saw temps in the upper 50s and low 60s today. The middle Tanana Valley was pleasantly mild at 63. Eagle saw 58, Northway 62. 61 degrees around Fort Yukon, 50 around Arctic Village, and 46 for Anaktuvuk Pass. All of the North Slope saw temps in the 30s. You got inland a little bit more, up around, well, let's see, as you get up toward some of the higher terrain there, not away from the coast, temperatures jumped up a good 5, maybe even 10 degrees. So wouldn't be surprised to see some of the stations a little bit further inland reporting temps in the 40s like you see around Anaktuvuk Pass. Around Kotzebue Sound, 30s and 40s there. Kotzebue was 47, 54 in Nome. Interior locations, again, considerably warmer, even in the lower 70s. Galena was only 64. Same around McGrath, about 62 there. 70 in Bethel, a very mild day for you. And 41 out around St. Lawrence Island. St. Paul and St. George were both in the lower to mid 40s, lower 60s for King Salmon and Dillingham. It looks like beautiful weather there to be flying around, and 50s for most of the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint was 57, Adak was 46, and 44 out in Attu. Overnight low temperatures will stay in the 40s and 50s for the lower terrain as you get up toward the Seward Peninsula. 30s there, 20s for the North Slope. Southeast in the lower to mid 40s. South central lower 40s. Kodiak Island 45, about the same for the Alaska Peninsula and the chain. High temperatures tomorrow for the southwestern lowlands as well as the Yukon Valley in the 60s and 70s. Again, Bethel looking at 73, south central upper 60s and low 70s, southeast upper 50s to almost 70 degrees in some places around Juneau. Should be a mild day there. Low to mid 30s for most of the North Slope. Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse could be a little bit warmer ahead of that next wave of low pressure. 50 in Nome, 53 in Nunivak Island, and Dutch Harbor and Unalaska closer to 50 degrees with 65 in Kodiak. Wow, it's going to be a mild day for you. IFR conditions early in the morning on the north slopes of the eastern Brooks Range as that snowy weather is developing and moving eastward. IFR across the leading edge of the front, moving across southern parts of the Bering Sea waters, and MVFR in the morning for some of the western Alaska Range region. Southeast looking pretty good. Watch what happens in the afternoon. Widely scattered showers and storms are possible in the eastern and central interior. MVFR for many areas across the Chukchi Seacoast and limited visibility at times across the lowlands of the eastern north slope part of the Brooks Range there. And that continues to improve, though, across the coastal regions. And IFR starting to improve across most of the Bering Sea, with the exceptions of it moving into St. Paul and St. George. So keep your eye on that if you're out or heading to the Pribilofs for tomorrow afternoon. Past conditions look like this. Improving conditions for Anik, Tuvik, and Adigan Pass throughout the daytime tomorrow. But again, an IFR start is certainly possible with snow in the region. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass. VFR conditions are expected to develop by the afternoon. Same for improvements there in Rainy Pass throughout your Wednesday. Windy Pass also looking for improvements quickly by the midday. Isabel Pass starting at MVFR for your Wednesday afternoon. Metasta Pass, visual flight rules expected there. We expect VFR by the afternoon for Tanita Pass, and all day long in Portage Pass. Chilkoot and White Pass also looking pretty good. Freezing levels indicate that cold weather trying to drop southward, but it will improve as the further south it goes as it runs into a ridge of high pressure across south central. You can see conditions are fairly warm out across the west coast with freezing levels above 8,000 feet and about 6,000 to 8,000 feet for most of the Panhandle tomorrow. Icing potential is light to isolated moderate at worst across the eastern interior and north slope, mainly above 7,000 feet. Again, a chance for thunderstorms across the east and above 6,000 feet for the western Aleutians and above 8,000 feet offshore of southeast and south and west of Haida Gwaii. The jet stream has low pressure across the southern Bering Sea. Fast-moving winds there steering that storm track well out of reach of Alaska. We have several areas of low pressure close, but the only one that's really having a pretty big impact on us right now is the one dropping southward across the north slope, and obviously that's bringing colder weather and snow, as we've talked about. At 9,000 feet, the winds are a little bit higher than we saw last week, 25 to about 30 knots, generally from west to east across the interior, south and westerly flow across the eastern chain, and north and easterly winds across northern parts of southeast, with light winds across most of south central Alaska. Really similar conditions here at 3,000 feet. Wind speeds are about the same, 10 to about 25 knots across the north with a northwesterly flow for the Chukchi Coast. Low pressures in about the same position there across the western chain with southwesterlies in command of the Bering Sea, and north and easterly winds for the northern parts of southeast. A little bit of a light flow across southern southeast, and wind speeds much lighter across the Parks Highway in the Matanuska and Susitna valleys. Turbulence potential below 6,000 feet in the north as that frontal boundary is crossing over. Watch for showers and thunderstorms to develop and worsen that on an isolated basis. And in the central and western chain, isolated chop possible there for Adak, Atka, all the way out to Kiska and Attu below 4,000 feet. That's your aviation forecast. I'll be back with a look at your marine weather here in just a few minutes.
This is Captain Gary Gore, a 727 pilot for United Airlines with nearly 13,000 hours. In the late spring of 1984, he was involved in a very serious microburst wind shear encounter at Denver's Stapleton International Airport. This is how he remembers that day.
Well, that morning, as I was driving to the airport, I happened to notice the mountains to the west were starting to pick up some lenticular cloud formations. And later on in dispatch, as I was reviewing the weather forecast, they indeed had forecast virga to be forming in the area later on that afternoon. Also a possibility of wind shears in the Denver area. When I walked out to the aircraft, I noticed the area was developing quite a few virga clouds. And I checked with my engineer to see what weather was as reported by the ATIS information. He said they reported gusty winds in the area predominantly out of the west, and they were using runway 35 left at Denver, which is over 10,000 foot runway. And we went ahead with a normal pushback, and as we taxied around the east end of the building, found about 18 aircraft in front of us waiting for departure. The ground control told us to stay with them and get in the line, and when it became our turn to move over to the run-up area, the south end of 35 left, that would be the time they'd switch us over to the departure tower frequency. I elected to use 5 degrees of flap for our takeoff and told them to plan for a normal EPR, and when we got out to the runway we would decide whether or not we would use the maximum EPR if conditions required it. There was fairly darkening lower level clouds coming in, and we could see some virga further up towards the north and the northwest of the airport. Nothing around the actual airport vicinity. We spotted some dust blowing about midfield point on the runway, and we discussed that in some length, and I'll recall that they were doing some dirt moving and construction in that area, and that it indicated that there's fairly good wind blowing there, but nothing of any concern. About that time I heard a Rocky Mountain Dash 7 call to the tower that he had a 20-knot loss on climb out, and as I looked out the front of the cockpit window, I could see the Dash 7 was about the midfield point where we'd spotted the dirt blowing, and he looked to be about 200 to 300 feet above the ground. I then proceeded to brief the rest of my flight crew that due to the look at the sky conditions and that, we would still be using the 5-degree flap takeoff, that we would use maximum EPR for the takeoff, and then the tower cleared us to follow the next aircraft onto the runway. I turned on the color radar and observed and brought to the attention of the rest of the crew that we had a very strong cell with a red center, approximately 35 miles northeast of the airport. But since everything was moving from west to east, that it would not be a factor. We'd be turning to the northwest away from it anyway. At that point, we were lined up on the runway, and tower cleared us for takeoff. Said your north field wind is 270. It figures about approximately 8 knots. Your midfield wind is 270 at 20, gusting to something like 28, which correlated with the wind that was blowing across the runway and all that dirt at midfield point. And your south field wind is 260 at approximately 9. So I told the rest of the crew, I said, well, that looks okay. Set takeoff thrust and move the throttles up to the max EPR setting for the takeoff power. So we continue with the normal takeoff, and about the point where we've been observing the blowing dirt and where we thought the 20 gust and the 30-knot wind was located, the co-pilot called out. He says, got an airspeed hesitation here at 120 knots. And I looked down, and as soon as I looked down, the airspeed was starting to, he says, oh, disregard it. He says, the airspeed's accelerating again. We continue with a normal takeoff roll and acceleration into VR. I started bringing the aircraft nose up, and I had about 9 to 10 degrees of body angle. When we just about reached V2, co-pilot called my attention again. He says, the airspeed's starting to decay. I glanced down to see the airspeed starting to move back towards VR. I reached over and I called for firewall power, and the co-pilot followed up on my push, and we had the throttles maximum forward. At that time, the flight engineer called out, you've lost 20 knots. I looked down and observed the airspeed had actually decreased 20 knots from our V2 speed, and we're now starting back. It was about 10 knots below what our VR speed had been. I checked the rotation at about the 9-degree point we had, and I realized that we were committed and had to try and get the airplane off the ground, and I continued with the rotation, noting that the V speed was still about, we're about 2 to 4 knots below VR speed, but continue with the rotation. At about the point when we had an 18-degree body angle or so, all of a sudden the airspeed shot up at the same time that the airplane suddenly left the ground. My engineer was calling out our good body attitude, and airspeed was increasing, and at that point we had a normal climb out, except very bumpy and rocky. As we were about 9,500 feet, my engineer called out that he was having a problem to pressurize the aircraft. So then I advised the co-pilot, tell ATC that we cannot pressurize the aircraft, we'd like to return to Denver, and that we would be not requiring any assistance because it was just a pressurization problem. We then went ahead and had a normal approach and landing in Denver, and then taxied into the gate, shut the aircraft down, and went through the shutdown procedure. At about that time, I noticed quite a few of the ramp people coming out and scurrying over to look at the towards the back of the aircraft. My co-pilot asked, would it be okay if he went back there to see what everybody was going back to look at? And I said, yeah, go ahead. And I said, I'll help the engineer write up the problem with the pressurization. But shortly after that, my co-pilot came back and he said, I think we found the pressurization problem. And I said, oh, how come so fast? He says, well, it seems we got a piece of red and white antenna sticking in the belly of the airplane.
The antenna referred to by Captain Gore was located nearly 1,200 feet beyond the end of the runway and was broken off only 13 feet above the ground. Dramatic proof of the potentially devastating consequences of a microburst encounter. Like Captain Gore's experience, many times the warning signs may not be absolute, so be alert to the sum total of all indicators. On takeoff or landing, if you do suspect wind shear, consider your runway selection or a short delay until conditions are more favorable. If you do make a go decision, either to take off or land, consider the options available to increase the performance of your airplane, such as your flap setting and your speed margin. If you do find yourself in a severe low-altitude wind shear during takeoff or landing, anticipate increased performance as you enter the headwind portion of the shear, followed by suddenly decreasing performance as you transition into the downdraft and tailwind segments of the shear. In this situation, you must respond quickly and correctly to avoid an accident. Increased thrust may be required all the way to full forward throttles, and trading speed for altitude by increasing your pitch attitude as necessary up to stick shaker speed may allow you to maintain or establish a positive flight path. Now, let's sum things up. The relative rarity of severe low-level wind shear encounters may in effect increase their potential as a hazard. Be prepared when you're operating in areas where the potential for wind shear exists. Be alert not only to low-level wind shear alerts from ATC, but also to PIREPs from other flights. And remember, you are an important part of this information process. If you suspect wind shear, report it. Although your encounter may have been minor, the changing nature of the phenomenon could make that encounter critical for a subsequent flight. Review your operating procedures on a regular basis and know the performance limits of your aircraft. So if you find yourself in an emergency situation, you can respond promptly and correctly. Remember, there have been documented cases of wind shear which no aircraft has the capability to successfully traverse.
I'm going to have to go watch airplane now. Here's a look at southeast. Northwesterly winds are going to be fairly light as we go through the next couple days, especially in southern parts of southeast and offshore south of Sitka. About 15 to 20 there. 3 to 4 foot seas in most of those areas, but the further north you go, they're going to pick up a little bit more from the north and the west. 25 knots or so, 3 foot seas inside of Lynn Canal. 4 to 5 foot seas there as you get north of Sitka, especially from Yakutat to Cross Sound. As we get into Thursday, you'll notice winds diminish even more. Northerlies continue in Lynn Canal, looking at 20 knots with a 4 foot sea. Northwesterlies a little bit further down through Stevens Passage and into Clarence Strait. But look at the winds go light here south of Sitka, only 5 to 10. 5 foot seas continue. 5 to 6 foot seas a little bit further north with a light southerly wind working outside of Cross Sound, and northerlies still around Yakutat and southward at 15 knots. For south central, light winds inside of Prince William Sound, that's what you like. Northwesterlies 10 knots with a 2-foot sea. Westerlies coming across the north and western Gulf, 15 to 20 there with 4 to 5-foot seas. And south and westerly winds working up Shelikof Strait, west of the Barrens and into Cook Inlet at about 10 to 15 with generally small seas at 2 to 3, maybe even 4 feet for Shelikof Strait. And conditions will be about the same there on Thursday. Southerlies continue in Cook Inlet, more of a south and easterly flow developing for more of the northern parts of Cook Inlet for Thursday. Light winds there at 10 knots, more of a variable day inside of Prince William Sound. Light winds and small seas, and more of a south and westerly flow outside the western Gulf at 15 to 20. 4 to 5-foot seas expected there for Thursday. For the Alaska Peninsula, look for southeasterly winds coming over, 15 to 20 knots, 5-foot seas on the Pacific side, 4-foot seas up through Chignik and Castle Cape, and light southwesterlies inside of Bristol Bay with a 1-foot sea on Wednesday. And that'll become a stronger southeasterly wind as we get into Thursday with a 5-foot sea on a 25-knot wind. You'll see those winds also pushing over from the Pacific coast with an 8-foot sea there. Southeasterlies also pick up across the southern Bering Sea coast, as well as southwesterlies from Sand Point to King Cove and False Pass with an 8-foot sea on Thursday. For the Aleutians, central and eastern parts of the island chain, we'll see south and easterly winds 15 to about 25 knots at their strongest. 6 to 9-foot seas along the Pacific coast, 4 to 5-foot seas for the central and eastern Bering Sea coast. Southeasterlies from Kiska to Adak, and from Kiska to Shemya, you're looking at more of a northeasterly flow on 20 knots with a 10-foot sea. For Thursday, the winds pick up there to 25 knots. Meanwhile, the south and westerly flow for the central and eastern chain holds around 15 to 20, 25 knots south of Adak and Atka, though, with an 8-foot sea there, and 3 to 4-foot seas for the central and eastern Bering Sea coast as we get into Thursday. To the west, north and easterly winds from St. Lawrence Island toward the Pribilofs, 15 to 10 knots there across the southern Bering, 25 knots a little bit further north. Look for light winds around 15 to 25 for Thursday across the west coast. And for the north, a westerly wind for the Beaufort Seacoast at 20 knots. Northwesterlies coming into the Chukchi with 3 to 4-foot seas there. Ice continues to hold close to Barrow, so look for 30 knots there with no seas listed at this point. 5 to 6-foot seas for the Beaufort, and winds diminish across the Chukchi Seacoast for Thursday. Recapping tonight's weather, a cold front is dropping southward into the interior, and as it goes, it will slow down and warm up, but there is a chance for about an inch of snow around the eastern Beaufort Seacoast and into the Brooks Range as we head into tomorrow. Watch for a few showers across southern parts of southeast, and a frontal boundary will bring rain to parts of southwestern Alaska as we get into Thursday. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather, and we'll see you right here again tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Hi, I'm Sophie Minnick, President and CEO of SIRI, and this is my friend Raven.
Hi, everybody.
At SIRI, we're pleased to be able to teach the next generation about their Alaska Native heritage, and that's why we are proud to sponsor In My Family on Alaska Public Media.
I love helping kids learn about Native languages from across the state. Thank you, Sophie. It's been so much fun.
And thank you, Raven. You're doing a terrific job.